sitting in an office that was at once filled to the brim with papers, reports, ledgers, and the other paraphernalia of governance and business. And secondly, being comfortable and relaxed, never too crowded, no matter the size or number of guests. The god Ka'lor Tagra looked over the latest crime reports for the city of Polaron and was displeased. Not at the numerous constables and other officers of the law within the city, but at the persistent and insidious nature of the newest challenge to arise for them. A new drug had cropped up, seemingly from nowhere, and its effects were making it a hotly sought-after item. It allowed its users to join into cooperative, euphoric, hallucinogenic, and semi-manifested experiences, with some of the props and the effects of the user's experience fading and appearing as relevant, with only the users truly aware of the nature and detail of their shared experience. Normally, this would not be a cause for concern. New ways of enjoying oneself cycle regularly in and out of vogue throughout the years of history. But, in this case, 1 in 36 on average would become the embodiment of all the cooperative users' negative, emotional, and psychological traits. This would turn the victim into a maddened force of rage, hate, and destruction. And force required to bring these rampages to a halt was far beyond what Ka'lor was comfortable hearing being required for what would be considered basic civilians. The few incidents involving those persons of more potency, such as veterans, adventurers, hunters, or the like, had thankfully been minimum in their destruction. This blessing was only due to the companions of such individuals, likely having protocols in place in case of such events. Mind control, influence, and charms are well-known tricks in the realms. Thus, most groups of seasoned adventurers have seen the wisdom in having such plans in place, and these plans normally led to the capture and not the death of the victim. The main difference is the objects and effects of the experience have been reported to being brought to bear in such cases against the victim, and to great effect. Something was very wrong with this new form of getting high. It was too well distributed to be a bunch of independent producers with the consistency of the seized product. The fact that every time the various alchemists and other scientific lab coats attempted to study or otherwise analyze samples beyond the most cursory and surface level, the samples would undergo seemingly random reactions, and made such efforts unproductive and only heightened worries. Even his own divine senses, applied with any effort, would trigger the response, further bringing worry to the old gnome's brow. By the 9 and 4, welcome once more to the library. I am the recorder, and I want to say hello to each and every one of my perceptive patrons, regular visitors, and of course, my new guests. In today's entry, we are looking at how the realms function away from the glamour of the crown and the state. Expanding on some of the topics covered in Entry 2 of this third series of Intro to the Realms, we will see just how the powers that be deal with some of the issues of trying to govern those that, by their nature, avoid and refute governance. Before he could give the matter much more thought, the first of what would end up being several guests arrived. By the end of the next hour, Ka'lor had played host to no less than half a dozen representatives, and each had a tale that shared commonalities with the reports he was just looking over earlier, while each having different forms, and in some cases, intended uses. From the hunters, he heard of a new combat drug that granted 24 hours of vigor and incredibly enhanced performance that even extended to the user's gear and weapons. To Criterion finding that artificial void crystal capable of inducing the fatal Cryston Celestial Dissolution Disorder, or C2D2, were beginning to appear in markets across Criterion. A courier from the Expedus Fleet Command Council brought word of 2 other substances that were similar to the one plaguing Polaron had been discovered amongst the fleet, but instead of an ingestible series of tablets, one was in the form of a stick of infused butter, to be used to make a confection or other baked good to be shared amongst those intending to enjoy its effects together. The other was a flask of syrupy liquid to be diluted in a serving bowl of beverage and imbibed in a similar joint manner, as well as the effects that had been noted in Polaron. The reports from the fleet added a new angle that was chilling in its implications. And that was these substances, no matter their form, had proved extraordinarily toxic and nearly lethal to both dragons and Analar. This effect extended to even dragon kin, such as the Dragon Knight. After hearing the various envoys and their representatives out, addressing their questions, Ka'lor was again alone in his office, considering all that had been discussed, and the one question none of them had dared to ask. Where was all this coming from? Who was behind it all? And who was arranging all of this? If not for Ka'lor, or perhaps his son, Rolak. The 2 Tagras were well regarded as having their fingers in about everything imaginable when it came to commerce, bureaucratic affairs, or governance. And those in the know understood that without the Tagras and their competitions with each other, there would only be a fraction of efficiency or effectiveness in the logistical trains of the realm. However, both Ka'lor and his son Rolak were equally in the dark as to this mystery, as Ka'lor's first action upon discovering it had been to consult his son on the matter, and finding his son was likewise dealing with the tablet form of this drug being sold in his many bars, with no more clue as his father had to its origins. The fact that these drugs were with little doubt being created with the same core ingredients, and were being distributed as widely and rapidly as these appeared to be, and without the knowledge of Ka'lor, was not something that inspired much other than panic and worry in the many who understood how things truly function. Thus, Ka'lor was intent on finding some answers, not only for himself, but for the realms as a whole. As he stood to begin his trek to the first of his planned stops, he took up hold of his cane firmly, and leaned on it with a weight that showed better than perhaps anything else the gnome's annoyance and concern over the implication of this latest puzzle. When those in power face an unknown or new challenge, they will, as a matter of honor and pride, attempt to deal with it themselves. After a fair effort is put in, however, it is encouraged that they reach out to the wise and learned of the realms. There are many forms that this can take, from taking counsel from the high priest of one of the gods to convey concerns and seek advice, to the more often optioned route of meeting local leaders of criminal enterprises to address their knowledge or complicity in the subject of interest. Most often, this will take the form of envoys and messengers reaching out to others of power, and slowly but surely raising the matter up to higher and more important individuals for addressing and dealing with. Often, this process can be bypassed by going to a number of influential or particularly well-connected people, as these individuals carry both the weight of their reputation as well as the strength of their character to be able to go directly to many sources and get the information required in the most efficient method possible. However, getting the aid of any of these individuals requires a level of backing or reputation that limits it to only the most influential or vital of organizations, such as the rulers of nation-states or the Hunters Association. While he made his way along the tunnels under his beloved Polaron, Ka'lor moved with a speed and silence that would have been of note, except in the dim lights of downtown Polaron, that area of the city built under to serve as an emergency set of housing and production. Only a few of the best could even notice that someone had passed. Only the sound of a secret door sliding closed, or of a footbridge being crossed, could be heard. And of course, by the time any had looked or otherwise investigated, there was no one to be seen or heard. Soon enough, though, the dim tunnels gave way to the light and warmth of fire, with torches mounted along the walls. This is where the underworld of Polaron held their ill-gotten gains, trained their talent, and reveled in their victories while commiserating their failings. Deep in those tunnels, in a vast chamber originally intended for use as a water reservoir for the city in times of need, Ka'lor stood on a platform several hundred feet from the reservoir's stony bottom and calmly waited. A soft vibration rattling up from the contents of the chamber. Millions upon millions of copper coins, hundreds of feet in depth as well as in width and breadth. And soon enough, the neck, head, and shoulders of a massive black-scaled dragon burst from the lake of copper and arched menacingly over the gnome. Dark vapors of a toxic nature emanated from its scaly hide, and it held its mouth ever so slightly open, so the acrid fumes of its breath would flow over the fool who chose to enter his chambers without permission. Before the first breath of air could escape his lips, however, Stennox, the draconic grandmaster of Polaron's Underworld, better known as the Grey Guilds, recognized who, in fact, had just waltzed into his private hoard room, and with no little amount of annoyance, leaned back and away from the god that had come before him, complaining about he should at least announce himself before arriving unexpectedly, all while continuing to swim in his copper pool of coins. In response to which, Ka'lor merely complimented Stennox on the increase of his mighty hoard, and poured nearly 50,000 more copper coins into the pile, and complimented him on the effectiveness of his entrance. With the pleasantries thus seen to, Ka'lor wasted no time in appraising the dragon on the situation, and demanding any knowledge that the Grey Guilds had on the matter of these new substances. The underworld of the realms is based on a series of decentralized and trade-oriented groups and organizations, all interlinked via independent middlemen, as was described in an earlier entry. However, due to the nature of the underworld and those that choose to live in that world, and moreover seek positions of power within it, even as decentralized and unregulated as it is, a recognized but always shifting pecking order does exist, generally with smaller guilds or groups working under the protection and guidance of larger ones, all while trying to supplant them in the eyes of their peers. Each of the major cities tends to have its own nexus of guilds and associated groups, and most time a Grand Master of the city, or boss of the bossless, will be recognized. This will be the individual with the most authority and likely the most loyalty within the underworld power structure, and often have the backing of members of the local governance, either through choice, blackmail, or compromise. In effect, the underworld and its guilds and markets serve far more as a gray space than outright black. However, murder and many restricted items are still their stock in trade, even if they serve a vital function in the vastly adventuring-based economy of the realms. You see, there are a number of generally observed rules regarding the sale or purchase of objects of a personalized or unique nature, particularly when a clan, house, or other larger and possibly still living group is involved. Among these is the fact that any object that is sufficiently unique needs to be held for possible recovery and claiming by rightful descendants or others with a viable claim. This is a process that takes a few weeks at the fastest, and is woefully apt to find that, indeed, a claim does exist for the object, and that the payment as a matter of reward is authorized, but will often only be a pittance of the value of the object in many cases. While many merchants will only pay coppers on the gold for any items of this nature that are not obviously clear and free of such possible claims, and then they will let those items sit in storage as the proper checks are conducted. Many adventurers find it just easier to offload such items to the various private merchants that seem to always be around places that adventurers are common, who, as opposed to coppers on the gold, will pay silvers on the gold at the very least. Such items will find their way to the various black markets around the realms, often at a slight discount compared to freshly forged or enchanted offerings of a similar nature. Objects that have claims extant upon them that are too hot for whatever reason will often find their way home. This is a matter of self-preservation for the various groups in the underworld, from those that simply are not afraid of them. Sometimes, you just shouldn't steal someone's wagon, and you should never, ever kill their pet. Returning to his office, frustrated and with no new leads, as the Grey Guilds were just as lost as everyone else when it came to this new wave of addictive products. None of the members of the guilds were involved in the distribution or sales networks that peddled the drugs, and those dealers that had been nearly captured had all chosen to overdose on their product, rather than face questioning at the hands of the guilds. This left only more questions, and as the door to his office slowly came to a close behind him, just as he rounded the corner of his own desk to sit down, Ka'lor became aware that he had his own unannounced guest, and he smiled wearily at the symmetry of situations that had occurred this day. Sitting in one of his more comfortable chairs was an analog, wrapped head to toe in thick, heavy traveler's robes of leather and cloth, dyed a deep but slightly fading royal purple. Only his hands and a strip across his eyes were visible, and they both revealed the age and wiry strength etched into the deep lines in those little bits of exposed flesh. A slight nod, slowly made, was offered as a means of greeting, and Ka'lor returned the gesture as he sat down, drawing forth a large coin from a drawer in his desk setting it on the desktop and sliding it towards his guest. His guest was none other than one of the 4 sons of the Ka'lor First, Jackson, known only as the Merchant. A businessman of no less talent and skill than Ka'lor and his son, and as the elder Tagra had long suspected, was most likely the driving horse behind the criminal obfuscation of independent and neutral syndicates, better known as coins. Coins and their various agents and go-between had been a growing force, acting as a shadow to the already existing underworld structures, but outside its control or influence. Only the fact that the most elite or well-connected even had a chance to do business or be invited to join with them had allowed them to grow so quickly and relatively unopposed. In effect, it was the underworld that the underworld went to get things done. They were not exactly allies, but as the merchant quickly laid out, they were not anywhere near foes either. The merchant had come to share information on this new explosion of product, explaining that while coins were involved with the transport and logistical matters of the completed product, they were not aware of either the processing center's nature or location. Furthermore, while the merchant could confirm that all of these products were being derived from a common base component, and one that seemed to be erratic in nature, that was the extent of even his understanding of it. No trace of what the base component actually was, and no idea where the centers where it was converted into the products that would be left in dead drops for transports, payment attached, could be found. A few more minutes of conversation passed, as both men confirmed the other's conclusion on the inviability of these drugs as a business proposition. And they, along with the pseudo-Void Crisp, were only reasonable as a form of subversive underground attack, not some form of profit maker. The rate of adverse reactions was far too high for any other explanation. The exorbitant cost being charged for the combat stem, which, unlike the rest of the drugs, appeared to have few, if any, adverse effects that were unexpected for a 24-hour-long combat drug, would likely be serving as counterbalance to the production costs of the others. This meant all the substances were connected, and the force behind them not a member of any known group. Whoever was behind this, it was a foe to the existing order, and one of significant sophistication and resources. The merchant assured Ka'lor any information uncovered concerning this affair would be shared with him as soon as was reasonably possible, and Ka'lor agreed to share intel for the efforts of rooting this threat out. And with that, Ka'lor was once again left to his thoughts and his office. Perhaps the biggest shakeup to the underworld in the past few ages is the rise of coins, the underworld of the underworld. These are the best of those that walk the dark alleys and silent tunnels of the underworld, and thus far have defied any and all attempts at infiltration, even rebuffing agents of several gods. Details are scant, and only a few members of the Hunters are suspected of being inducted into the greater organization, allowed to do business while not being privy to any of the goings-on of any of the members, shared directly. As can best be assessed, however, coins serves as a middle ground for these most free and independent of operators and agents to meet, deal, and settle matters, all in safety and security. Also present is a strong support network of specialized merchants and craftsmen, all ready to ply their arts for the right amount of coin. Of course, no one knows where their central centers of operations are, only that they have several slots, or all-inclusive centers, in most nations and realms. These serve as the brick-and-mortar face of coins, and are always tastefully bland and utterly unremarkable, at least on the outside. Inside, all the tools and expertise for any high-level operation can be found and purchased, along with secrets that even the spy guilds of many nations will often seek to purchase. Nothing will be what it seems within, and the entire building is most likely armed with several layers of defensive and retaliatory options for use on any uncouth guests or the uninvited. Coins and the underworld it caters to, along with the powers that be who rely on them to keep disorder and lawlessness to acceptable levels, all work to their own ends, while relying on others to fulfill their own goals without causing an unacceptable degree of strife and discord in the populations they are meant to serve and exploit in equal measure. However, it is of note, the reach and influence of all these organizations stops at the border to the realms under the control of the ancient empire. The Empire already had its own networks of crime and corruption, pirates and smugglers, and these have been at effective war with their realm's counterparts since the signing of the treaties that first united their parent nations. Even less is known of their structure or the manners of their operations than of the coins, other than they seem to prize brutality and force of action over any subtlety. They remain a wild card in calculations made when trying to deal with the Empire, and have served to effectively isolate it further from general trade or travel with the greater realms. With that, this brief look at the various criminal and underworld elements of the realms is now at its conclusion. I hope you have a better understanding of the hows and whys of the various groups that make up the underworlds of the realms, how they function, and how they provide needed functions within the structure of the realms. As always, I want to thank you for your time, your interest, and your support for and in the Realms of Jam'mar. Until you next make your way back to the library for another entry, I, as always, have been the recorder, and by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other. If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching,